The artist needed a change, a fresh start, somewhere quiet. He found it in a forgotten corner of the countryside, an old house shrouded in silence. The locals said it was abandoned, whispered stories of it being cursed. He didn't listen. He saw only solitude, a chance to reconnect with his art, to find inspiration in the quiet. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves as he unloaded his canvases and paints, each brushstroke echoing in the stillness. Dust motes danced in the faint sunlight filtering through grimy windows. He felt a flicker of excitement. This was his haven now, his muse. The house creaked and groaned around him, whispering secrets in the wind. Floorboards sighed under his weight. Shadows stretched and twisted in the flickering lamplight. He told himself it was just the age of the house, settling after years of emptiness. He chose a room at the back, overlooking a tangle of overgrown rose bushes. A single window, boarded up, allowed a sliver of light to pierce the gloom. Perfect. He set up his easel. The blank canvas, a white void in the dimness. He was eager to begin, to lose himself in the act of creation. He stood before the blank canvas, brush poised. His mind, usually brimming with images, felt strangely empty. The silence of the house pressed in on him, stifling. He dipped his brush, a single drop of crimson welling on the tip. He hesitated. Something felt off, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the feeling of being watched. He glanced over his shoulder into the shadows pooling in the corners of the room. Nothing, just his imagination playing tricks. He shook his head, banishing the unease, and touched brush to canvas. The red bloomed, a splash of colour against the stark white. He began to work, broad strokes forming a hazy background, a landscape emerging from the void. As he worked, the silence of the house seemed to deepen, pressing against him like a physical weight. The air grew cold, sending a shiver down his spine. He could have sworn he heard a whisper, a sigh, but when he turned, there was nothing there. He stepped back, frowning at the canvas. The landscape, a serene vista of rolling hills and a distant forest, was marred by a smudge of black in the foreground. He hadn't painted that. He went to wipe it away, but his hand froze. The smudge, it was taking shape. It elongated, twisting into the outline of a figure. A chill raced down his spine. He stepped back, heart pounding against his ribs. He blinked, expecting it to vanish, a trick of the light, but it remained. Each night, the figure on the canvas became clearer. A woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a haunting sadness. He tried to paint over her, to reclaim his canvas, but his brush refused to obey. It was as if the canvas itself rejected his attempts. And then, the background began to change. The tranquil landscape warped, twisting into a grotesque parody of itself. The once vibrant colours turned sickly, the sky a bruised purple, the trees skeletal claws reaching towards the heavens. The house was alive. He woke with a gasp, heart hammering. A sound had woken him, a soft sob coming from the studio. He crept down the hallway, each creak of the floorboards raising goosebumps on his arms. He pushed open the door to the studio, his blood turning to ice. The woman in the painting was crying, tears of blood streaming down her face. The landscape behind her was a hellscape, flames licking at a darkened sky. And then she turned her head, her eyes, two bottomless pits of despair, locking onto his. The canvas rippled. The woman, no, the figure, stepped out of the frame, the boundary between art and reality dissolving. Her feet, bare and bloodied, made no sound on the wooden floor. She moved toward him, her spectral hand reaching out, fingers slender and pale, tipped with long, sharp nails. He stumbled back, tripping over his own feet, scrambling away from the apparition. He pressed himself against the wall, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Fear, raw and primal, coiled in his gut. The figure glided towards him, her sorrowful eyes boring into his, her voice a hollow whisper that seemed to slither from the walls themselves. "He trapped us here," she hissed, her breath a cold gust against his cheek. He was frozen, paralyzed by terror. The figure tilted her head, her expression shifting, a flicker of something else in her eyes. Something hungry. He was no longer just an artist seeking solitude. He was a prisoner in his own haven, trapped in a nightmare of his own making, or rather a nightmare the house had chosen to paint for him.